If you like this story, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next exciting stories. And now let's enjoy the story. The sun was setting over the North Carolina highway as Staff Sergeant James Miller steered his dusty blue Ford pickup into Wilson's gas station. Located on the outskirts of Fort Bragg, the small station sat isolated, its neon sign flickering weakly in the growing darkness. After 15 grueling months in Afghanistan, the simple sight of a regular American gas station felt strangely alien to James. As he pulled up to pump number 3, the crunch of gravel under his tires brought a sense of home, albeit faint. James's military fatigues were still crisp and clean. He hadn't even taken the time to change after landing. His sole thought was getting home to surprise his wife Sarah and their 6-year-old daughter Emma. They weren't expecting him for another week, but James had managed to catch an earlier transport. The warm, humid evening air was typical for North Carolina in late summer, a stark contrast to the dusty, arid environment he had grown accustomed to overseas. The warrior of Afghanistan, James Miller wasn't just any soldier. He was a legend in his own right, a decorated member of the U.S. Army Special Forces. Over 3 tours in Afghanistan, he had earned a reputation as one of the most skilled and fearless operatives in his unit. From the arid plains of Helmand Province to the rugged mountain ranges of Kunar, James had faced challenges that would break lesser men. Among his peers, James was known for his uncanny ability to remain calm under pressure. In one particularly harrowing mission, his team was ambushed while escorting humanitarian aid to a remote village. Surrounded on all sides with enemy fire raining down, James orchestrated a counteroffensive that not only broke the ambush, but also ensured the safe delivery of the supplies. His decisive actions that day earned him the Silver Star and the respect of his unit. His comrades often spoke of Miller's focus, a term coined to describe his unparalleled situational awareness. During a raid on a heavily fortified compound suspected of housing insurgent leaders, James's split-second decisions saved countless lives. He navigated the chaos with precision, neutralizing threats with calculated efficiency. The operation, once thought impossible, became a textbook example of modern warfare, with James at its helm. But it wasn't just his tactical brilliance that set him apart. James had a deep sense of duty and compassion. On multiple occasions, he put his life on the line to protect civilians caught in the crossfire. In one instance, he carried an injured Afghan child for miles through treacherous terrain to ensure she received medical attention. Stories like these spread among both his fellow soldiers and the local population, earning him the nickname the Protector. Despite his many accolades, James remained humble. He often deflected praise, crediting his team for their success. To him, being a soldier wasn't about medals or recognition. It was about the mission and the people he served alongside. Stepping out of his truck, James stretched his tall, lean frame, his combat boots hitting the ground with a familiar thud. At 32, James looked younger than his years, except for his eyes. Eyes that had witnessed far too much in 3 tours of duty. Inside his wallet, a crayon drawing from Emma served as a talisman of hope and love. It depicted their family, 3 stick figures with wide smiles standing in front of their house. "Come home soon, Daddy," she had scrawled in wobbly letters. Smiling at the memory, James thought, "Well, baby girl, Daddy's finally home." The gas station was quiet. Only one other car was parked near the convenience store entrance, and through the store's windows, James could see an elderly clerk reading a newspaper behind the counter. The peaceful scene felt surreal after months spent in a combat zone. James inserted his credit card into the pump, his military training unconsciously assessing his surroundings. He noted the security camera above the store entrance, the blind spots behind the ice machine, and the clear sight lines to the highway. These habits, ingrained from years of combat, now seemed like echoes of another world. As James began filling his tank, his thoughts wandered to the reunion awaiting him at home. He imagined Sarah's tears of joy and Emma's excited leap into his arms. The evening breeze carried the scent of pine trees and barbecue, a far cry from the acrid smell of sand and diesel he'd endured for months. A few crickets had started their nightly chorus in the tall grass behind the station, adding to the sense of tranquility. But the peace was short-lived. The distant rumble of motorcycles broke the calm, their growl growing louder as they approached. James's combat-honed instincts stirred as three large cruisers roared into the gas station, their chrome glinting under the fading sunlight. They exuded an air of intimidation as they parked near the store entrance, taking up more space than necessary. James remained composed, his face neutral but alert. He had seen their type before, bullies looking for trouble. The leader, a towering man with a scraggly gray beard, stepped off his bike first. His vest bore a prominent patch that read, Road Devils NC, along with several others, marking him as the group's president. The other two riders dismounted, one with a shaved head and the other wearing a bandana, their boots crunching against the gravel as they approached. The leader's voice broke the quiet. Well, well, what do we have here? He drawled loudly, his tone dripping with mockery. Looks like one of Uncle Sam's toy soldiers decided to grace us with his presence. His companions snickered on cue, their laughter echoing like bad dialogue in a cheap movie. James turned slightly, acknowledging them with a brief nod but saying nothing. His calm demeanor was a calculated response, honed by years of diffusing tense situations. But the bikers weren't satisfied. The leader, whom his friends called Bear, began to approach James, his path indirect and predatory. Maybe we should thank him for his service, Bear said, the sarcasm in his voice as thick as the scent of cigarettes and cheap beer on his breath. Bear stopped uncomfortably close to James, trying to use his size to intimidate. James remained still, his combat-trained muscles relaxed but ready. Years of experience had taught him that the best defense was often to deny potential enemies the reaction they sought. Bear wasn't deterred. You know what I think about the military? He growled. I think you guys just play dress up and waste our tax dollars. He deliberately bumped James's shoulder as he passed, heading toward the store entrance. His two companions followed suit, each making sure to jostle James in some way. One spat near James's boots, while the other muttered a slur under his breath. Through it all, James remained statue still. His face betrayed no emotion, but his mind cataloged every detail. The way Bear favored his right leg slightly, suggesting an old injury. How the bald biker kept his left hand near his belt, possibly concealing a weapon. The nervous energy of the one with the bandana, making him the most unpredictable of the trio. Inside the store, the elderly clerk watched the scene with growing concern, his hand inching toward the phone on the counter. James knew he needed to get some water and coffee for the drive home, but entering the store meant stepping into a volatile situation. Taking a deep breath, he steeled himself and pushed open the door, the bell above it chiming innocently, a sharp contrast to the tension inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the biker spread out, knocking items off shelves. Accidentally. Bear loomed near the chip aisle, his voice booming. Hey, soldier boy, you think you're some kind of hero? He crushed a bag of chips in his hand, letting the crumbs fall to the floor. His companions laughed, their voices a mix of malice and bravado. James moved to the water section, his movements deliberate and calm, all while keeping the bikers in his peripheral vision. Can't even answer a simple question, the one with the bandana sneered. He slammed a cooler door shut with unnecessary force. Maybe they don't teach manners in the army anymore. James finally spoke, his voice steady and professional. Excuse me, he said to the bald biker, blocking the coffee machine. But his politeness only fueled their mockery. What's that? The biker jeered, pretending to cup his ear. Did the toy soldier say something? He poured coffee onto the floor deliberately. Oops, looks like there's been a spill. Better call in the military to clean it up. Bear sauntered over, standing next to the bald biker to form a wall of leather in hostility. You military types think you're better than everyone else, don't you? He snarled. Walking around in your fancy uniforms, expecting people to bow down and thank you? James remained silent, his eyes forward but his muscles coiled like a spring. He knew better than to engage, but when Bear reached out and grabbed the American flag patch on James's uniform, tugging at it, the line was crossed. What's this worth to you, soldier boy? Bear sneered, giving the patch another tug. The air seemed to freeze as James's eyes shifted to meet Bear's. Something changed in those eyes, a cold, professional focus that sent a chill through the room. I've seen guys like you before, James said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of experience. In every country I've served in, there are always bullies who mistake kindness for weakness. Bear's bravado faltered, but he wasn't ready to back down. He pulled back his fist, ready to throw a punch. The fluorescent lights of the convenience store buzzed louder in James's ears as adrenaline sharpened his senses. Time seemed to slow down as Bear's massive fist cut through the air, aiming for James's head. Years of training took over, and James sidestepped the punch with calculated precision, his body moving faster than the bikers anticipated. Bear's momentum carried him forward, stumbling slightly as James pivoted and placed himself in a defensive stance. Snake and Spike, the other two bikers, charged in from either side, their movements clumsy but aggressive. James analyzed their approach with the same calm focus that had guided him through countless battles overseas. Snake lunged with a wild swing, but James deflected the blow, redirecting Snake's energy and sending him careening into a shelf of canned goods. The crash echoed through the store as cans tumbled to the floor. Spike reached for something on his belt. A knife, James realized. The glint of steel caught the corner of his eye. Without hesitation, James moved towards Spike, closing the distance before the biker could fully draw the blade. Grabbing Spike's wrist in a vice-like grip, James twisted it sharply, forcing the knife to clatter to the floor. A yelp of pain escaped Spike's lips as James pushed him back with enough force to knock him off balance. Bear recovered quickly, roaring in frustration as he charged at James like a bull. But James had faced far deadlier opponents. Using Bear's size against him, James sidestepped once again and executed a textbook hip throw. The massive biker went airborne for a brief moment before crashing onto the floor with a heavy thud. The impact knocked the wind out of him, leaving him gasping and momentarily stunned. "Stay down," James commanded, his voice calm but firm. The authority in his tone was enough to make even seasoned soldiers pause, but Bear's pride refused to let him surrender. He struggled to his feet, his face red with rage. Meanwhile, Snake had regained his footing and grabbed a beer bottle from a nearby display. He smashed it against the counter, the jagged edges glinting menacingly under the fluorescent lights. "You're dead now, soldier boy," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. Frank, the elderly clerk, watched the scene unfold with the sharp eyes of a man who had seen combat before. A Vietnam veteran, he recognized James's movements immediately. They weren't flashy or overly aggressive, but they were precise and purposeful. Every step James took seemed to anticipate the biker's next move. To Frank, it was like watching a ghost in action, a phantom of control and efficiency moving through the chaos. "Damn," Frank muttered under his breath, his admiration growing with each passing second. He noticed how James used Snake's momentum against him, sending the biker tumbling. He saw how Spike's attempt at drawing a weapon was neutralized before it could even become a threat. And Bear? Frank had to stifle a whistle when the big man hit the floor with a bone-rattling thud. James wasn't just defending himself. He was dismantling the threat piece by piece, all without breaking a sweat. James assessed the situation with the same methodical clarity that had saved his life on countless missions. Spike was still on the floor, clutching his wrist and groaning. Bear was upright but unsteady, his movements slower after the hard fall. Snake, however, was the immediate threat, his broken bottle poised to strike. James moved swiftly, closing the gap between himself and Snake before the biker could react. With one fluid motion, he disarmed Snake, twisting the bottle from his hand and tossing it aside. James then delivered a controlled strike to Snake's midsection, knocking the wind out of him and sending him to his knees. Bear, enraged beyond reason, let out a guttural roar and charged once more. This time, James didn't dodge. Instead, he stepped into Bear's path, catching the biker's arm mid-swing and locking it in a joint manipulation hold. The maneuver forced Bear to his knees, his face contorted in pain. "Enough," James said, his voice steady but commanding. "This is over." Frank stood behind the counter, his hand resting on the phone he had used to call 911. His other hand clenched tightly, a mix of adrenaline and awe coursing through him. Watching James move, Frank felt a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. "That's not just a soldier," Frank thought to himself. "That's a warrior, A damn professional. The sound of sirens cut through the tension, growing louder as police cars pulled into the gas station lot. The bikers froze, their bravado evaporating as the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the store. Officers stormed in, weapons drawn, their eyes darting between the battered bikers and James, who stood tall and unscathed. "Hands where we can see them," one officer barked. "I'm Staff Sergeant James Miller, U.S. Army," he said calmly. "I was defending myself." Frank stepped forward from behind the counter, his voice shaky but resolute. "It's true, officers. I saw the whole thing. These three started it, and the soldier gave them every chance to back off." The officers took in the scene, the scattered shelves, the broken beer bottle, the knife on the floor, and quickly assessed the situation. One officer began handcuffing the bikers, while another approached James. "You handled yourself well, Sergeant," the officer said, his tone respectful. "We'll need a statement, but based on what we see here, it's clear you were defending yourself." James nodded, his expression neutral. "Of course, officer." As the bikers were let out in handcuffs, their tough guy personas crumbled. Bear avoided James's gaze, his earlier bravado replaced with a mix of anger and humiliation. Spike muttered curses under his breath, while Snake, still clutching his ribs, remained silent. Frank handed James a fresh cup of coffee. "This one's on the house," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You remind me of the boys I served with in Vietnam. Quick, efficient, and always in control." James accepted the coffee with a nod of gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply. As the police cars pulled away, the gas station returned to its quiet state. James stepped outside, the cool night air washing over him. He glanced at his watch. 8:30 p.m. He could still make it home by 9:30, just in time to see Emma before she went to bed. Climbing back into his truck, James took a deep breath and started the engine. The events of the evening were already fading into the background. His focus was on the road ahead and the family waiting for him at the end of it. The night stretched ahead of James as he drove down the darkened highway. The soft hum of the truck's engine was a stark contrast to the chaos he had just left behind at the gas station. The adrenaline that had kept him sharp moments ago began to fade, replaced by a calm focus on the journey ahead. He glanced at the duffel bag on the passenger seat, its contents holding a small bear in a miniature army uniform. It was Emma's belated birthday gift, a token of the love he had carried with him through the heat and dust of Afghanistan. James's thoughts wandered back to the gas station. The confrontation had been unexpected, but not unfamiliar. Over the years, he had faced countless adversaries, some far more dangerous than the bikers. Yet something about the encounter lingered in his mind. Perhaps it was Frank, the elderly clerk, whose eyes held a depth of understanding that only those who had seen war could possess. Frank watched James drive away from the gas station, the tail lights of the truck disappearing into the night. He stood at the door for a moment, leaning on the frame, his thoughts heavy with memories of his own past. The scene he had just witnessed was something that would stay with him for a long time. James's movements had been a masterclass in discipline, control, and precision. To Frank, it was like watching the soldiers he had once served with in Vietnam, the same quiet strength, the same unyielding focus. As a young man, Frank had been part of a reconnaissance unit, crawling through the dense jungles of Southeast Asia. He remembered the tension of every mission, the unrelenting awareness of danger that could erupt in an instant. Watching James that night, he had seen the same instincts honed by war, the same grace under pressure. It had been decades since Frank had worn a uniform, but in that moment, he felt a kinship with the younger soldier, a bond forged across generations of service. Back in the truck, James glanced at the GPS. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the occasional glow of streetlights casting fleeting pools of light over the asphalt. He thought of Sarah and Emma, their smiles, their laughter. For 15 months, those memories had been his anchor. Now he was just an hour away from home. The events at the gas station replayed in his mind, not as a source of pride, but as a reminder of the life he had chosen. The military had taught him to be a protector, to stand firm in the face of threats, and to act decisively when others faltered. But it also came with a weight, the knowledge that every action carried consequences. He wondered what those bikers would tell their friends about the encounter. Would it change them? Would they think twice before antagonizing someone else? At the same time, Frank sat behind the counter at the gas station, replaying the security footage on his phone. He decided to save a copy, not for sensationalism, but because it captured something he felt people needed to see. It wasn't just a fight, it was a demonstration of what discipline, restraint, and training looked like in action. Frank sipped his coffee, the familiar bitterness grounding him as memories of his own time in the service surfaced. He had seen too many soldiers succumb to anger, letting their emotions dictate their actions. But James had been different, controlled, precise, unshakable. That boy's got a gift, Frank muttered to himself, and he's got a heart too. The phone rang, pulling Frank out of his thoughts. It was one of his old war buddies, Charlie, who had already seen the video making rounds on social media. "Frank, you didn't tell me you had front row seats to the show of the year," Charlie teased. Frank chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "You should have seen it in person, Charlie. That kid's the real deal. Makes me proud to see someone like him wearing the uniform." The two men talked for a while, their conversation drifting from the gas station incident to their own days in the service. By the time they hung up, Frank felt a sense of closure. He had witnessed something remarkable that night, and it had reminded him of the values he had once fought for: discipline, courage, and the quiet dignity of a true warrior. The hours passed quickly for James as the familiar landmarks of his hometown came into view. The anticipation of seeing his family again quickened his pulse. Pulling into his driveway, he saw the porch light still on, a beacon welcoming him home. Through the window, he could see Sarah curled up on the couch, a book in her hands. Emma's toys were scattered across the living room floor, evidence of the life he had worked so hard to protect. As James stepped out of the truck, the front door opened and Emma came bounding out, her pajamas flapping as she ran. "Daddy!" she screamed, her voice filled with pure joy. James dropped to one knee, catching her as she threw herself into his arms. He held her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the weight of her small body against his chest. Sarah appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. She walked to James, her steps quickening until she was in his arms as well. The three of them stood there on the porch, wrapped in an embrace that spoke of love, relief, and the unbreakable bond of family. "Welcome home," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. James kissed her forehead, his own eyes damp. "It's good to be home." Meanwhile, at the gas station, Frank locked up for the night. He flipped the sign on the door to closed and took one last look around the store. The shelves were a little messier than usual, but that was a small price to pay for what he had witnessed. As he turned off the lights, he thought about James and the quiet strength he had shown. "The world could use more men like that," Frank muttered as he stepped into the night. The stars above were bright and clear, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light always found a way to shine through. The morning after James's homecoming, the sun rose over the sleepy town, painting the sky with hues of orange and gold. At the gas station, Frank was already up, brewing a fresh pot of coffee and preparing for another day. Despite the early hour, the phone at the counter began to ring. Frank answered with his usual gruff demeanor. "Wilson's Gas." "Frank speaking." "Frank, is it true? Was it that soldier from last night?" The voice on the other end belonged to another local veteran, Ted, who had caught wind of the incident from the video circulating on social media. "Sure was," Frank replied, leaning back in his chair. "Kid's a damn marvel. Took down 3 troublemakers without so much as breaking a sweat. You should have seen him, Ted. Every move calculated, every action deliberate. It was like watching a master at work." Ted chuckled. "Sounds like we need more men like him around. That's the kind of discipline you don't see every day." "You're telling me," Frank said, glancing at the security footage paused on his computer screen. He had replayed it a dozen times already, each viewing cementing his admiration for James's skill and composure. "The boy's a soldier through and through. Makes you proud to have worn the uniform, doesn't it?" The two men spoke for a while longer, sharing their thoughts on the values of discipline and respect that had defined their own military service. By the time Frank hung up, a sense of pride and camaraderie filled the small store. Across town, James sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee steaming in front of him. Emma was perched on his lap, chattering excitedly about her upcoming school project. Sarah moved about the kitchen, her presence a comforting rhythm in the background. For the first time in months, James felt truly at peace. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking the momentary silence. It was a text from an old friend and fellow soldier, Mike. "You're famous, Miller," it read, followed by a link to a news article. Curious, James clicked the link and found himself looking at a headline. James sighed, shaking his head. He had never sought recognition for his actions, least of all for something he considered part of his duty. Yet the story had already begun to spread, drawing attention from both local and national media. As he scrolled through the article, he noticed a quote from Frank describing him as a true professional, the kind of soldier every young recruit should aspire to be. "What's wrong, honey?" Sarah asked, noticing the furrow in his brow. "Nothing," James replied, setting the phone down. "Just something about last night. Frank's proud of me, I guess." Sarah smiled, leaning over to kiss his cheek. "You deserve it, James. You've given so much for this country. It's okay for people to see what kind of man you are." James nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure how he felt about the attention. For him, the incident at the gas station had been about protecting himself and de-escalating a dangerous situation. Nothing more, nothing less. Later that day, Frank's gas station became an unexpected hub of activity. Veterans from the area began stopping by, each of them eager to hear Frank's first-hand account of what had happened. Among them was a young Marine named Kyle, fresh out of his first deployment and eager to connect with others who shared his experiences. "So what was he like?" Kyle asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. Frank smiled, pouring a cup of coffee for the young man. "He was like a ghost," Frank said, "silent, quick, and deadly efficient. But it wasn't just his skill that impressed me. It was his restraint. That's what makes a true warrior, son, knowing when to act and when to hold back." Kyle nodded, taking in Frank's words. "I hope I can be like that someday." "You will," Frank said firmly. "It's about discipline and heart. James has both, and so will you if you stick to the right path." As the day went on, more veterans and locals stopped by, each of them adding their own perspectives to the growing story. By evening, the gas station felt less like a business and more like a gathering place, a nexus for those who valued service, respect, and the bonds forged in uniform. That evening, James received another text, this time from his commanding officer at Fort Bragg. "Saw the footage, Miller. Proud of you. Let's talk when you're ready to return." James stared at the message for a long moment, his thoughts drifting to the future. The military had been his life for so long, shaping him into the man he was today. But as he looked around his home, at Sarah and Emma laughing together in the living room, he wondered if it was time to consider a different path, one where he could be present for the moments that mattered most. The decision wasn't one he could make lightly, but for now, he was content to simply be home, surrounded by the people he loved. The following days saw a transformation in the small town as James's story continued to ripple through the community. The footage of his actions at the gas station had not only captivated the local population, but had also gained national attention. News outlets picked up the story, labeling James as a hero in uniform and praising his discipline and restraint. Veterans organizations, schools, and even local businesses began referencing the incident as an example of courage and character. At Wilson's gas station, Frank found himself busier than ever. Customers who had never stopped in before were now lining up to hear his recount of the gas station showdown. "You're becoming a bit of a celebrity yourself, Frank," one customer joked as Frank poured him a cup of coffee. Frank smirked, adjusting his cap. "I'm just telling it like it happened. That boy James did all the hard work. I just stood here watching like a hawk." A few veterans who frequented the store began organizing informal gatherings to discuss James's story. They viewed it as a teachable moment, an opportunity to inspire younger generations. Among them was Kyle, the young Marine who had visited earlier. Encouraged by Frank's words, he decided to spearhead a community event to honor veterans and their contributions to society. James, however, remained modest about the attention. He spent his days quietly with Sarah and Emma, cherishing the family time he had longed for during his deployment. Despite his best efforts to avoid the spotlight, invitations to speak at local schools and events began pouring in. At first he declined, but Sarah encouraged him to consider it. "You have a chance to make a difference, James," she said one evening as they sat on the porch. "People look up to you. You can teach them something valuable about discipline, courage, and humility." James nodded thoughtfully. He had never seen himself as a teacher, but perhaps Sarah was right. His experiences could serve as a beacon for others. The first event James agreed to was a Veterans Appreciation Day at a local high school. Standing on the auditorium stage, he felt a wave of nerves he hadn't experienced even in the most intense combat situations. But as he looked out at the sea of young faces, he steadied himself. "Discipline isn't about being perfect," James began, his voice steady. "It's about making the right choices, even when it's hard. At that gas station, I didn't fight because I wanted to. I fought because I had to. But more importantly, I fought in a way that minimized harm, not just to myself, but to others. That's what being a soldier and a person is about." The audience listened intently as James shared stories from his deployments, highlighting moments of teamwork, sacrifice, and resilience. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Teachers and students alike lined up to thank him, some even asking for advice on how to pursue a career in the military or service professions. Meanwhile, Frank and Kyle were hard at work organizing a larger community gathering. They planned a Veterans Appreciation Night at the town's community center, complete with guest speakers, food, and a small exhibit showcasing local veteran stories. James's incident at the gas station became the centerpiece of the event, symbolizing the values of service and selflessness. The night of the event, the community center was packed. Families, veterans, and local officials all gathered to honor those who had served. James was invited to speak again, but this time he shared the stage with Frank. Together they recounted the gas station incident, weaving it into a larger narrative about the importance of discipline, respect, and unity. "It's not just about one man or one moment," James said, his voice carrying through the hall. "It's about what we all stand for, as veterans, as citizens, as human beings. We're stronger when we stand together, when we support each other." Frank added, "And it's about teaching the next generation, showing them what's possible when you have heart and discipline." The event was a resounding success, strengthening the bonds within the community and inspiring a renewed appreciation for veterans and their sacrifices. As James stood with Sarah and Emma at the end of the evening, shaking hands and exchanging smiles with attendees, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. As the weeks passed, life gradually returned to normal, but the impact of James's actions lingered. The gas station incident became a local legend, a story told in classrooms, homes, and veterans halls. Frank continued to share it with anyone who would listen, always emphasizing the values it represented. For James, the experience solidified his resolve to make a difference, not just as a soldier, but as a father, a husband, and a member of his community. He knew his journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt he was exactly where he needed to be. A quiet morning settled over the town, the kind that carried the promise of fresh starts. James stood in his backyard, gazing out at the rows of trees lining the horizon. Emma's laughter echoed from the swing set, her joy infectious as she played while Sarah watched nearby. For James, these moments were priceless, but they were also bittersweet. They reminded him of how much he had missed during his deployments and how fleeting peace could feel. The events at the gas station, though weeks behind him, remained fresh in his mind. The confrontation had been a stark reminder of the fragility of order and the strength of discipline. More importantly, it had shown him the ripple effect of small actions. What had begun as a defensive act had grown into something larger, a movement of unity and respect within his community. James's thoughts turned to Frank. The older man had become a mentor of sorts, offering wisdom born from years of experience. Over cups of coffee at the gas station, they often talked about the challenges faced by returning veterans. "You've got a gift, James," Frank said one afternoon, setting down his mug. "Not just with your hands or your training, but with your heart. People see that in you. Don't let it go to waste. James considered Frank's words carefully. He had always seen himself as a soldier, defined by the missions he undertook and the uniform he wore. But now he began to wonder if his purpose extended beyond the battlefield. Perhaps his greatest mission was here, at home, among the people who needed guidance and inspiration. Across town, Frank was busy preparing for another veterans' breakfast at the gas station. The small gatherings had become a tradition, a way for veterans to share stories, offer support, and reconnect with a sense of purpose. The latest breakfast was shaping up to be the biggest yet, thanks to the renewed interest. "Frank, do you think James will come today?" he asked, arranging chairs around the tables. "Hard to say," Frank replied with a knowing smile, "but if I know that boy, he won't let us down." Sure enough, James arrived just as the first guests began to trickle in. He greeted everyone warmly, shaking hands and exchanging smiles. For many of the older veterans, seeing a younger man like James take up the mantle of leadership was a source of pride and reassurance. The conversations flowed easily as the room filled with laughter and camaraderie. Stories of wartime heroics and personal struggles were shared, each one a thread in the rich tapestry of their shared experiences. James listened more than he spoke, absorbing the lessons and perspectives of those who had walked similar paths before him. That evening, as James sat on the porch with Sarah, he opened up about the thoughts that had been weighing on his mind. "I've been thinking about what's next," he began, his voice thoughtful. "The Army's been my life for so long, but maybe it's time to find a different way to serve." Sarah reached for his hand, her touch grounding him. "Whatever you decide, we're with you," she said. "You've given so much already. Now it's time to think about what makes you happy." James nodded, a sense of clarity beginning to form. The gas station incident had opened his eyes to the impact he could have as a mentor and a leader outside the military. Perhaps his next mission wasn't on a distant battlefield, but right here, among the people he cared about most. The decision didn't come easily, but over the following weeks, James began exploring ways to transition into a new role. He reached out to veterans organizations, offering to volunteer as a mentor for those struggling to adjust to civilian life. He also started attending local community meetings, where his insights and leadership skills quickly earned him respect. At one such meeting, James was approached by a local teacher who had heard him speak at the high school event. "Have you ever thought about working with kids?" she asked. "We could use someone like you to teach them about discipline and resilience." The idea planted a seed in James's mind. He realized that his experiences, both in the military and in life, could serve as a valuable resource for the next generation. He began considering the possibility of becoming a teacher or coach, roles where he could guide young minds and help them navigate the challenges of growing up. As James stepped into these new opportunities, the community's support never wavered. Frank continued to champion him, Kyle followed his example with renewed purpose, and Sarah and Emma remained his steadfast anchors. Together, they formed a network of strength and encouragement, proving that even the most profound changes could be faced with courage and hope. One evening, as James tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, are you still a soldier?" she asked. James smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'll always be a soldier, sweetheart," he said, "but now I'm also something else. A dad, a husband, and someone who wants to help others. That's my new mission." Emma nodded, satisfied with his answer. As she drifted off to sleep, James felt a deep sense of peace. He had found his path, one that honored his past while embracing the future. The days following James's decision to step into a new role felt both exhilarating and daunting. For years, his identity had been intertwined with his military service. Now, as he embraced a life of mentorship and community engagement, he found himself navigating unfamiliar territory. Yet the same discipline and resilience that had served him in the Army proved invaluable in this new chapter. One crisp morning, James received a call from a local veterans organization inviting him to participate in a workshop aimed at helping service members transition to civilian life. The event, titled "Bridging the Gap," was designed to address the unique challenges veterans faced when reintegrating into society. James agreed without hesitation, recognizing an opportunity to share his experiences and inspire others. The workshop was held in the community center's main hall, its walls adorned with flags and photographs honoring local heroes. As James entered, he was greeted by a room full of familiar faces, men and women who had served in various capacities, each carrying their own stories of sacrifice and strength. Among them was Kyle, the young Marine, who had recently joined the organization as a volunteer. James took his place at the front of the room, scanning the crowd with a sense of purpose. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady. "First, I want to thank each of you for your service." He shared his own journey from his time in Afghanistan to the moment at the gas station that had sparked a personal transformation. "For a long time, I thought my identity was tied solely to my uniform," James admitted. "But what I've learned is that the skills we develop as soldiers, discipline, leadership, perseverance, don't disappear when we take off the uniform. They're tools we can use to build something new." The audience listened intently, their expressions reflecting a mix of admiration and introspection. After his talk, James invited questions, encouraging an open dialogue. One attendee, a former Navy officer named Linda, asked, "How do you deal with the fear of starting over?" James nodded thoughtfully. "It's natural to feel that way." "Oh," he said. "But fear is just another obstacle, like the ones we've faced before. You tackle it the same way, one step at a time with a clear goal in mind, and you lean on your team. In this case, that team is your family, your friends, and groups like this." Meanwhile, back at Wilson's gas station, Frank was busy sharing updates about James's progress with anyone who'd listen. The small gathering place had become a hub for veterans and locals alike, all eager to hear about James's latest endeavors. Frank's pride in James was evident, his stories always punctuated with phrases like, "That boy's got heart," and "He's a true leader." One evening, Kyle stopped by to thank Frank for introducing him to James. "He's changed my perspective," Kyle said. "Seeing someone like him make such a big impact gives me hope for what I can do." Frank chuckled, pouring Kyle a fresh cup of coffee. "You've got that same spark, kid. Stick around James long enough, and you'll figure out how to use it." James's influence continued to grow. He was soon invited to collaborate on a program at the high school, teaching students about resilience and leadership. The sessions were a hit, with students eager to learn from someone who had faced real-world challenges and come out stronger. One day, after a particularly engaging class, a student named Mia approached James. "Mr. Miller," she said hesitantly, "I just wanted to say thank you. Hearing your story makes me feel like I can handle anything." James crouched to meet her gaze, his expression kind. "You can, Mia. Life will throw obstacles your way, but you're stronger than you think. Just remember, resilience isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up." As weeks turned into months, James's new mission brought him a profound sense of fulfillment. The gas station incident that had once seemed like a fleeting moment of conflict had become the catalyst for a life dedicated to service in a different form. Through his work with veterans, students, and the community, James had found a way to honor his past while shaping the future. One evening, as James and Sarah sat together watching Emma draw pictures at the kitchen table, Sarah leaned against him and whispered, "You've found your place, haven't you?" James smiled, his arm around her shoulders. "I think I have. It feels good to be home, not just physically, but in every sense of the word." As the moon rose over the quiet town, James felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The road he had traveled had been long and difficult, but it had led him here to a life filled with purpose, love, and the unwavering support of a community united by respect and hope. The sun peeked over the horizon, casting golden light across the quiet town as James prepared for another day of service. The past months had been transformative, and each step he took felt like a continuation of the journey that had started at the gas station. His life was no longer about reacting to challenges, but actively creating opportunities for others. One morning, James received an invitation to speak at a statewide Veterans Leadership Summit. The event was set to bring together hundreds of former service members, community leaders, and advocates to discuss how veterans could play pivotal roles in shaping society. The keynote address had been offered to James, an acknowledgement of his growing influence and the respect he had earned. Sarah was thrilled when she heard the news. You're going to inspire so many people, James, she said, squeezing his hand. This is your chance to show others how powerful their stories can be. Though humbled, James approached the task with the same meticulous preparation he had applied to every mission. He spent hours drafting and revising his speech, ensuring it captured not only his personal experiences, but also the collective struggles and triumphs of veterans everywhere. On the day of the summit, James stood backstage, the murmurs of the crowd reaching him as he adjusted his tie. The large auditorium was filled with people from all walks of life, each of them eager to hear stories of perseverance and leadership. As his name was announced, "Good morning," James began, his voice steady but warm. "I'm here today not just as a veteran, but as a representative of the values we all hold dear: discipline, resilience, and service." He shared the story of the gas station confrontation, weaving it into a larger narrative about finding purpose beyond the battlefield. "That night, I realized something important," James said. "Our greatest battles aren't always fought with weapons. Sometimes they're fought with the choices we make, to stand tall, to de-escalate conflict, to lead by example." The audience was riveted as James spoke about his work with students, veterans, and his community. He emphasized the importance of building bridges, not walls, and finding strength in unity. "When we leave the service, we don't leave behind our ability to lead," James concluded. "We carry it with us into our homes, our neighborhoods, and our nation. Each of us has the power to make a difference, not just for ourselves, but for future generations." The standing ovation that followed was a testament to the impact of James's words. For many in the audience, his message was a call to action, a reminder that their stories and skills still held immense value. Back in town, Wilson's gas station remained a cornerstone of the community. Frank had turned it into more than just a business. It was now a gathering place for veterans, locals, and travelers alike. A bulletin board near the counter displayed photos and articles celebrating James's work, alongside announcements for upcoming community events. One afternoon, Kyle approached Frank with an idea. "We should start a scholarship fund for kids in honor of James," he said. "Something to help them pursue careers in service, whether it's the military, teaching, or public service." Frank's face lit up. "That's a damn good idea, kid. Let's make it happen." Within weeks, the James Miller Leadership Scholarship was established, funded by local businesses, veterans groups, and private donors. The first recipient was Mia, the high school student who had been inspired by James's story. She planned to study education and become a teacher, hoping to pass on the lessons she had learned. As James watched the scholarship announcement on the local news, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His journey had come full circle, from the dusty roads of Afghanistan to a quiet gas station in North Carolina, and now to a legacy that would continue to grow. That evening, as he sat on the porch with Sarah and Emma, James reflected on the path that had brought him here. The road had been fraught with challenges, but it had also been filled with moments of connection, learning, and triumph. "Do you think the scholarship will make a difference?" Emma asked, curling up beside him. James smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "I know it will, sweetheart. Just like every choice we make has the power to change someone's life." As the stars began to twinkle above, James felt a quiet satisfaction. His mission was no longer confined to the battlefield, but lived on in the lives he touched, in the community he helped shape. And for him, that was the greatest victory of all. The town's quiet charm seemed to hum with a renewed energy in the wake of James's leadership summit and the establishment of the scholarship fund. The community had embraced the values James embodied, transforming them into actions that would ripple far beyond the borders of their small corner of North Carolina. One brisk autumn morning, James found himself back at Wilson's gas station, sitting at a corner table with Frank and Kyle. The morning air carried a crispness that matched the coffee steaming in their mugs. The three of them were deep in conversation about the future of the scholarship program and its potential to expand. "We've already had interest from neighboring towns," Kyle said enthusiastically, spreading out a few flyers on the table. "If we can secure more funding, we could offer multiple scholarships next year." Frank nodded, a proud glint in his eye. "It's a hell of a thing we've started here. People are finally waking up to the idea that service isn't just about wearing a uniform. It's about giving back in any way you can." James smiled, listening to the younger man's passion. It reminded him of his own drive during his early days in the Army. You're doing great work, Kyle. Just remember, it's about consistency. These programs grow not because of big, flashy moments, but because people keep showing up day after day. Kyle absorbed the advice, nodding thoughtfully. Got it, James. Day by day. Later that week, James was invited to attend the first official meeting of the Regional Scholarship Committee, a group formed to oversee the program's growth. The meeting was held at the town hall, and as James entered the room, he was greeted with warm applause. Many of the committee members were people he had mentored or worked alongside. During the meeting, James presented ideas for expanding the program to include mentorship opportunities alongside the scholarships. It's not just about funding someone's education, he explained. It's about guiding them, giving them the tools to succeed in whatever path they choose. The committee unanimously supported the idea, and by the end of the evening, plans were in motion to pair scholarship recipients with mentors from the community, veterans, teachers, and professionals willing to share their knowledge and experiences. As the seasons changed, James's role in the community evolved. He continued to work with students at the high school, teaching them the principles of leadership and resilience. His sessions had become so popular that neighboring schools began requesting similar programs. James found himself traveling across the region, spreading the message that had become his life's mission. At one school event, a student named Carlos approached James after a session. "Mr. Miller," he said shyly, "I've been thinking about joining the military, but I'm not sure if I'm strong enough." James crouched to meet the boy's gaze, his expression encouraging. "Strength isn't just about muscles or bravery, Carlos," he said. "It's about knowing your purpose and standing by it, even when things get tough. If you believe in what you're doing, that's the greatest strength you can have." Carlos nodded, a flicker of determination lighting up his face. "Thanks, Mr. Miller. I think I'll give it a shot." Back at home, James found solace in the quiet moments with his family. Emma's curiosity about the world continued to blossom, and she often asked questions about his work. "Are you teaching people to be brave like you, Daddy?" she asked one evening as they played a board game. James chuckled, moving his game piece forward. "I'm trying to teach them that everyone has bravery inside them. Sometimes they just need a little help finding it." Sarah watched the exchange with a smile, her heart full as she saw the man she loved embracing his new purpose. "You've come so far, James," she said later that night as they sat on the porch, "and you're taking everyone around you with you." As winter approached, the town held a celebration to honor James in the growing legacy of the scholarship program. The event was held at the community center, decorated with twinkling lights and banners that read "Service, Leadership, Legacy." Frank, now a well-loved figure in his own right, took the stage to introduce James. "This town's always been about good people doing good things," he began. "And James here, well, he's made us all believe we can do more. He's not just a soldier or a hero, he's a builder of people, of connections, and of hope." The crowd erupted into applause as James stepped forward. He paused for a moment, taking in the faces of his friends, neighbors, and family. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice filled with emotion. "This isn't about me. It's about all of us working together to make something better. And as long as we keep showing up, day after day, we can create a legacy that lasts." As the evening drew to a close, James stood outside the community center, gazing up at the stars. Beside him, Sarah slipped her hand into his. "What's next?" she asked softly. James smiled, a sense of peace washing over him. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together. That's all I need to know." And in that moment, under the vast expanse of the night sky, James knew that his mission was far from over. But with every step forward, he was building something greater than himself, a legacy of hope, strength, and unity that would endure for generations to come. The morning air was crisp and invigorating as James walked through the bustling town square. The once quiet community had become a hub of activity, a testament to the growing unity and purpose that had taken root. Local businesses displayed posters supporting the scholarship program, and schools proudly showcased banners with the program's motto, "Service, Leadership, Legacy." James's first stop of the day was the community center, where a new mentorship program for scholarship recipients was launching. The program paired young students with seasoned professionals and veterans who could guide them in their chosen fields. The energy in the room was palpable as mentors and mentees met for the first time, exchanging handshakes and smiles. James addressed the group, his voice steady but filled with passion. "You are all part of something bigger than yourselves," he said. "This isn't just about education or careers. It's about building connections that will last a lifetime. Together, you're creating a ripple effect that will strengthen this community for generations." One of the mentees, a bright-eyed high school senior named Elena, approached James after the meeting. "Mr. Miller, I'm so grateful for this opportunity," she said. James smiled warmly. "You have what it takes, Elena. Keep working hard and don't be afraid to lean on the people here to help you reach your goals." Meanwhile, Frank's gas station continued to serve as a gathering place for veterans and locals alike. On any given day, the small shop was filled with the sounds of laughter, storytelling, and the clink of coffee mugs. Frank had become something of an unofficial historian for the town, collecting stories and photographs that documented the community's transformation. "You've created something amazing here, Frank," Kyle said one afternoon as he helped organize a display of veteran memorabilia. "This place is more than a gas station now. It's a cornerstone of everything we're building." Frank chuckled, his eyes twinkling with pride. "It's not just me, kid. It's all of us. And James. Well, he lit the spark. We're just keeping the fire going." As winter turned to spring, the scholarship program expanded beyond the town, attracting regional attention. Neighboring communities began adopting similar initiatives, inspired by the success of James's efforts. The program's impact was undeniable, with scholarship recipients excelling in fields ranging from education to engineering. One of the most touching moments came during a regional summit where past and present scholarship recipients gathered to share their stories. Mia, the program's first recipient, took the stage to recount how the support she had received had changed her life. "This program didn't just help me financially," Mia said, her voice filled with emotion. "It gave me a community, a sense of purpose, and the confidence to chase my dreams. I'll never forget what it means to be part of something this special." James watched from the audience, his heart swelling with pride. Moments like this reaffirmed the importance of his work and the profound impact of collective effort. Back at home, James found joy in the small, everyday moments with Sarah and Emma. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Emma shared her latest school project, a report on community heroes. She had chosen her dad as her subject. "Daddy, I wrote about how you help people find their bravery," Emma said, beaming. "My teacher said it was the best report in the class." James chuckled, ruffling her hair. "That's because you're the best storyteller, sweetheart." Sarah smiled, reaching for James's hand. "You've inspired so many people, James. But what's most special is how you brought that inspiration home to us." As the years passed, James's legacy continued to grow. The scholarship program became a model for other communities, and the mentorship initiative produced leaders who carried its values far and wide. Yet, through it all, James remained grounded, always returning to the place where it had all begun. On the 10th anniversary of the gas station incident, the town held a commemorative event at the community center. The evening was filled with speeches, music, and heartfelt tributes to the people who had made the transformation possible. Frank, now retired but still a beloved figure, gave the opening address. "10 years ago, a soldier walked into my gas station and changed everything," he began. But it wasn't just his actions that mattered. It was his heart, his vision, and his unwavering belief in the power of community. James Miller didn't just defend us that night. He showed us how to build something better. When James took the stage, the room erupted in applause. Looking out at the faces of his friends, family, and neighbors, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "This isn't my story," James said, his voice steady. "It's ours. Every one of you has played a role in what we've created here. Together, we've proven that strength comes not from what we take, but from what we give, and that's a legacy worth fighting for." As the night drew to a close, James stood outside under the stars, much like he had a decade earlier. Beside him, Sarah and Emma stood quietly, their presence a comforting anchor. "You did good, Daddy," Emma said, leaning against him. James smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "We all did, sweetheart, and we're not done yet. In the stillness of the night, James felt a profound peace. His mission had evolved, but its essence remained the same: to protect, to inspire, and to build a future grounded in hope and unity. And with every step forward, he knew the ripple effect of his actions would continue to touch lives for generations to come. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way, you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.